Hey everybody, it's Nathan Cool, and I've gotten a lot of great questions about two subjects in particular, the Flambient technique and also window pulls, and how to do this really well for real estate. So there's a lot of stuff that actually goes into it in prep, and I've gotten a lot of questions I didn't think might be asked, but they're really great questions. Things like, what would I do to get the proper exposure? What do I do in different cases if there's, slatted windows compared to views outside? And how do I actually judge which pictures to use? Am I getting the right exposure to be able to actually get a window pull outside? Do I always need to do the darken mode? What does darken mode do? So a lot of great questions have been coming in. I'm going to try to get to all of it, but I thought one way that would really help is if I show you a recent shoot. Just did this here a few days ago and ran across quite a few challenges. So just nothing edited. I copied all my raw stuff, and this might take a little while. I'm probably going to stumble a little bit because it's not all prepared, but if you bear with me a little bit, I'm going to show you what I would be up against. I'll talk you through it so we can maybe get some of these questions answered, and I'll have follow-up videos as well. You ready to get started? Let's go. Okay, so we've got this hasn't been processed at all, but this was an interesting room. It's one that I wanted to be able to get a nice window pull on. So once again, this is going to use Flambient and a window pull. So this is what I did going through it. I had been outside, I'd been shooting some entrance shots. This is just raw stuff, and I can show you some of that stuff in another video. But so I got inside, this was the first room I wanted to do, and so I was taking some ambient shots. Now what I'll do is I'll take a few different exposures. You can see this one here, if you look up here in the top right, you can see that was at f8, 1/20th of a second, ISO 320. And then when I went to this shot, keep your eye up there on the right, you can see that I went to 1/30th. So I went to 1/20th, went to 1/30th, and I thought that was pretty good. And of course on the camera, I'm also seeing the where the histogram is. And you can see the histogram, how that's pretty well evenly distributed, and I kind of like that. But what I tend to do is take the overexposed shot. Reason being is that since I'm using raw, it's easy for me to say, you know what, that's a little bright, so I'm going to tone that down. But first thing I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and assign my typical preset. So just one to correct the typical distortion. And if you go over here to the right side, you'll see where a lot of that is. It's just your basic profile corrections, removing chromatic aberration and verticals. I just have it done all in one little preset. So now that I've got that, I do like the way the verticals look. I can see it's lined up really well there. I'm just going to go ahead and copy all those settings. So I'm going to copy all those develop settings. And people said, well, why don't you use the sync button? I'll show you why. So I'm going to copy all those settings, but I'm not done with this picture. Since it's overexposed, I'm going to take down the highlights. Now, bear in mind, this is just for the ambient exposure, but it's way too much ambient. But I can, since it's raw, take down some of that exposure, which I'm doing over here on the exposure slider, and that looks about right about there. So now I've got a well-exposed ambient exposure, and I didn't save those settings. I'm going to actually hit the P button, and you'll see a little flag come up here, and I know that, boom, this is the one I want to use. So now I can use those settings that I used for just getting rid of the distortion, setting the verticals, the chromatic aberration, and those are all fine, but I can copy those. But these settings, now I'm happy with that ambient shot. So once again, all that I did was I said, you know what, that was a little bit high on the exposure when I first brought it in, after doing the corrections on it. So I took down the highlights a little bit, took down the exposure. I finally got where I was. So don't be afraid to do an overexposed picture for your ambient shot. If you're shooting raw, you can take that down. So anyways, the key to that though is definitely take more than one. Get a few of them, and you'll eventually then know where you are. Depending on the room, how much light's coming in, it'll start coming natural, and you'll get kind of close enough. So the next thing I did was I was using a Rove light, and it's a very powerful light, and I was like, well, can I get by without a window pull? Let me see what happens. So here you can see I'm at ISO 200 because I'm trying to expose for the outside at 1/160th of a second at f8. And that's a little on the low side. That's too dark. So I was like, well, let's pump up the flash on that, right? And I did. But what happened was there was so much flash power that it cast the color off the carpet up onto the walls and onto the ceiling, and it just, even it was casting onto the white doors. I'm like, that's not looking too good. No matter what I did moving the light around, still the same problem. So I took a lit shot, and here's one, here's another one. And this lit shot was kind of nice. It's like, okay, that's acceptable. I'm not getting all the color cast. So you know what? Let's go ahead and paste those settings there. So I'll just go develop settings, paste settings. Now this is just one way to do it. A lot of times I pick all the pictures at once and just paste the settings. I'll hit P to flag that as well. That might be a little bit underexposed when we're taking a look at what we're doing here, but what I can do now is I can use this layer, my ambient, to try to bring out some of where it's a little bit too dark. So that's fine. I don't mind that at all. So I'm pretty happy with that shot. If I wanted to though, I could say, you know what, let's just bring up the exposure just a tad, it's raw, and let's just leave it there anyways. So now the next thing is, since I don't have a shot that's taking care of the windows, I have to do a window pull. And so what I'm going to do is take a look at the different window pulls. So here's one I blew at the door, and you can see the key here is overexpose. You have to overexpose for the frame around it. It has to be completely blown out like I did in this case. And here I did another one that overexposed, kind of actually both. So I might be able to use this shot, although I can see there's a different amount of shadow out here which I might have to deal with. So I did a few of them just real quick, different ones that I could use. This is one shot where it looks like just about everything's overexposed except for the bottom of the door. This one's definitely overexposed, and I'm showing a good outside. And if we take a look up here, I went down to ISO 100, 1/160th of a second. Let's take a look at some of these other ones I did here. ISO 100, 1/160th of a second. And I think even this, all these were probably in that range. So that's not a problem then for what we're going to do for the outside. So let's just take one here that's blue everything. That was just a ton of light that was right there. I'll go ahead and paste those develop settings there. So we've got that. That's really nice looking. And I could probably tone down some of this if I wanted to, but I don't need to because it's a darken mode. So now I just set a flag there so I know which one I'm working with. So now I've got 3 pictures. I like them. And now I'm going to go right click and I'm going to edit as open as layers in Photoshop. So one of the key things here is, since you're taking so many different exposures, for instance on the ambient, if you're using a cam ranger, you're not touching the camera, but you could if you're turning on and off your flash like I do. And of course I'm touching my camera because I don't use a cam ranger all the time, and especially on this I've just gotten so used to not using it. So when these all come in here to Photoshop, I'm going to auto align those layers. Now you can take a look at another video that I have where I'm using my presets, and normally I would just hit F2 to do that. But basically it's a matter of taking all these layers, and I've got them all highlighted, and going to edit and then auto align layers. Usually auto works. If not, you can try reposition. So we'll just go ahead and do that. And once again, my F2 key would do that, and that's just one of the actions that I had made. So that auto aligned them. That's really good. Now, one of the questions I got was, well, how do I layer these? What's the order? Well, it's just a matter of saying that your top one should be your ambient. And so should that be luminosity? Should it be darken? So the ambient layer is always going to be a luminosity, unless you have some very hard problems. You can see in other videos where I'll duplicate this layer, the color is close enough, and I can go ahead and patch some stuff. So one of the definite areas would be like in the shadows. I'm not seeing a harsh, what would be an orange shadow there from where it was too bad. So that's looking pretty good. That's my luminosity layer mask hide. So he's really good. So now what I do is I take a brush, and I'm going to do the window pull in just a second. But I take this brush now at an 8% flow, and I start painting in where I want some of that ambient light. So it's a nice thing here. We should have some coming in there. This was too harsh over here by the door, so I'm taking out some of that. We should have a more natural looking chair there with the light that came in, and this horse's head, and a few things up here on the mermaid mirror. I'm not sure why they bought that for that house, but hey, everybody's got a different taste, right? Now here, I'm not worried about overlapping the window. Why? Because our window pull is going to take care of that. So got some of that ambient coming in. I can see if it's enough by going shift click on the mask. Yeah, not enough. I want to be able to show this sunlight coming in here. Now this isn't the greatest of carpets, but typically on a floor, I want it to make it look natural. And that just is what it is. I didn't design the house and I didn't decorate it. So it is what it is to try to show it without going too bonkers with it. So that gives me a nice little ambient look. So without the ambient, with the ambient, so that looks good. I might be able to tone down some of it in the corner. It got a little bit bright over here. So once again, just go erase, take the eraser tool, and I can just add once again a fairly low flow. I'll take the flow down to, let's say 8%, right? On the, it just moved around on me there on my eraser tool. Take it to 8%. And we'll go ahead and increase the size of that and just erase just a tad of it. So that looks good, okay? And I'm pretty happy with that, okay? And let's say that that's just good enough. I could check it one more time. I'm satisfied. Okay, now for the window pull. So the window pull goes on top. That goes into darken mode. So what does darken mode do? Darken mode says that it's going to darken things that aren't basically overblown. So where we had things that were overexposed, they're not being affected. So you can paint that on and it won't matter. And that's the trick here. So what type of layer do you use? If it's a ambient layer that you're using for the Flambient, it's going to be luminosity 90% of the time. If you're using a window pull, it's going to be darken mode almost all the time. The only time I differ with that is if I have what I call a repair shot, and that repair shot would be just the outside with no flash, and that way if I need to take out reflections. But in this case, that's good darken mode, so layer mask hide. Now I bring in my brush at 100% opacity. I lower the size of it, and then I can just go ahead and paint in where I want. Oop, gotta select my brush tool. I had my eraser. Told you this was going to be a few obstacles here and there. Okay, so take and I just paint that in, right? And I don't care about overlapping the door. That's the beauty of using this darken mode. It gets you in and out of this very quickly. Okay, so boom, 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 paint this on right there. And you can see how fast this goes, okay? So that looks pretty good. I like it. Now, there's a little bit of this weird shadow up here, and so what I might do is take the eraser and just say, you know what, oops, that's way too much erase. Let's take this down a little bit. And I'll just maybe erase some of this up here. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that looks fairly natural. Okay, now once that's done, then you go to Layer, Flatten Image, and then just Control S and save it. Now I'm back into Lightroom with that. So where we started from, if you recall, we had, let's back up here so we see what we were doing. We had this ambient shot that we liked, okay? And then we had a flash shot, which kind of balanced some of the ambient, but we still needed to bring more into it. And by the way, this might have been fine on its own with just a window pull, but I wanted to add a little bit more ambient into it anyways. And then of course I had one shot for the window pull. I was able to do just one window pull because I used the Rove light and flooded the heck out of this, and that was fine. So now we have this, and then I have a final touch at the end, the full bump. I go ahead and I apply that to it. That's not looking too bad. I might bring back a few of the highlights into this, bring back a little bit of the shadows, take out some of the clarity. This is where I would do my fine adjustments basically, is where all this would be. So that's not looking too bad. I actually kind of like the look of that. And then once it's done, then I would just go ahead and export that out. So that would be our final product there. Now I might go in, and if the owner wanted me to, or the client wanted me to change some of these spots, I would. Also, since I had to auto align, I'd probably crop a little bit of this out so we don't have those edges that are in there. And also I've gotten questions about the ceiling fan shadow. That's a natural shadow from the ceiling fan. That's not for my lights. I leave it. That's not a problem for me. Shadows exist, that's life. We don't want shadows from what we lit. For instance, if I were to shoot the room real hard, that's a shadow up here from my flash, which we don't want. So this is totally fine to have that in there, okay? So that's one example of a finished product. Now, I don't always have to do that. And by the way, if you want to see how I was hitting those with the Rove light and what that is, here's an example doing that room when I was going real large. So with this particular shot, I was doing the whole room. Here's one of the flash frames going off. Here's another one that I think I ended up using. And I did a Flambient with this, and I was walking around then and closing my eyes as I'm hitting these windows hard with a whole bunch of power, because once again, you overexpose these windows using that window pull technique. So you don't always have to use it if you have enough light in the right situation. Sometimes you don't have to see the outside anyways, you know, but you don't want it all blown out. So there's a lot of different adjustments you could do, but here's kind of a neat one that I did. So this entryway was really hard to light. There was actually up here a beam and you couldn't get up. It was a beautiful looking entryway, beautiful view outside. I wanted to at least get some blue sky here. So I walked around, I did some flash pops. So that's me holding my Rove light. I walked over here and I hit the Rove light again. And then I just played around. I was like, oh, what can go in here? I'll just get some quick footage. None of this really worked out well. It was way overblown, but that's, you know, part of getting all the footage. Before I did that though, I took some ambient shots. So let's say this was a good ambient exposure. Forget the color cast because this is just going to be for our ambient light. I like that, so let's go ahead and say, okay, I'm just going to go ahead and hit the Tachyna 1628. That's my preset on this. And I can see some of these verticals just don't seem right. So I'm going to go down here, and this is where I'd adjust it and go, you know what, let's see what happens if I just do auto. I like that better if I cut this off. See, all this lined up a lot better. So I actually like that. So I'm going to go ahead and copy those develop settings, copy all. And I'm going to go ahead and flag that. This is a little bit blown out here, so this is definitely one where I took the ambient shot. It was way too much, so I'll tone down those highlights, right? And might even just drop the exposure just a tad on that so we don't get it way overly done, right? And that doesn't look too bad though. Remember, once again, this is just for exposure. Now I'm going to go ahead and take these two shots here, which is me walking around. I'm going to take those two shots and I'm going to go develop settings, paste settings, right? Boom. Okay, those two are changed. Then I'm going to take all three of these. I put flags on these so I don't forget. I'm going to take all three of these pictures and I'm going to go edit in, open as layers in Photoshop. Before I do though, let me just check the alignment on this. Did that work right? Yeah, it did. Okay, then we're fine. So I will take all three of these, edit in, open as layers in Photoshop. Now this will be a real easy one because there's no window pull. It's just a Flambient, but it's a different type. So just to show you kind of a variety of what I would have done on site, I don't always use that darken mode window pull. If you have enough light, like with this Rove light or using the 8600, you know, that's 600 watt seconds. That's using like a handful, a ton of those Yongnuos or speed lights. So anyways, I've got those in there. I'm just going to hit my action to auto align all those layers. Don't have to go through that process again. This is my ambient. It's on top. I set it to luminosity mode, and there's a ghost of me because we haven't finished this. So layer mask hide, we'll just hide that for now. This one of me here, layer mask hide, and I'm going to go ahead then and a brush at 100%, and I'm just going to paint me in. This is also known as multiple flash pops. It's another technique that's being used. Excuse me, I got to select my brush tool. I did it again instead of my eraser. And let's go ahead and just brush in 100%. You can see, boom, that's basically taken care of. Okay. So now we've got a pretty nice balance of pictures here. Now that's not too bad on its own, but we'll just go ahead and add in some ambient. So if I go shift click and see the difference, yeah, I can see that I'm going to bring out more shadow here down at the bottom. So let's go ahead and bring that up to about 8% opacity. And bring the brush size down a little bit and paint in some of this shadow down here so it doesn't look like it was flashed really harshly. Bring in a little bit more here maybe too. The windows actually too, they're a little dark and this is overexposed. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to go boop and bring in just a little bit of ambient because I'm going to darken this later then in photo when I bring it back into Lightroom. So that's not too bad. So I'm painting in just some ambient and I'm going to check my ambient by going shift click. You know, need a little bit more natural light coming up here from that was coming in, so that's good. And I'm fairly happy with that. I erased a little bit too much here, so I'm just going to go ahead and bring my eraser, take it down to about 8%, and just erase a little bit of that ambient up there. I want it a little bit because I want it to be a little bit bright, because I'm going to fix some of that in Lightroom, because this is kind of a bright picture. I want to bring it down. So I'm fairly happy with that. So once again, layer, flatten image, and then Control S save. So I didn't have to do a window pull here. I had enough light. I did just a different technique with the multiple flash pops. So to me that looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and do the RE full bump on that, and hey, that brought it out really nice. But it's a little bit bright, like I said, so I'm just going to turn down that exposure a little bit. I'm definitely going to bring some shadows back into it compared to what I would have darkened those blacks a little bit. That looks pretty good. And now the verticals are off because of this. This is such a weird round room. So what I would do in this case is, I don't want to cut off all that. Let's go ahead and just crop that down to, let's say, a 5:7. I find that's pretty well acceptable too for most MLSs. So I'll bring it out just right before it hit that frame right there. And I think that's probably a good balance, showing the chandelier, the foyer, and all that. And so that would be it. And that's what I would do for this shot. So there's definitely more than one way to skin a cat, as they say. There's a lot of tools that you can put in your bag of tricks to be able to pull out something like this. Remember, if you're shooting real estate, houses weren't meant to be shot, they were meant to be lived in. So they weren't designed for photography. So you have to have a lot of different arrows in your quiver, tricks in your bag to be able to pull out a lot of stuff like this. So it's not one hard and fast rule to be able to say, oh yes, every shot I'm going to take an ambient exposure, I'm going to take a flash exposure, and I'm going to go ahead and do a darken mode window pull by overexposing. Just this shoot alone, there was just 2 examples that I just showed you where it did vary quite a bit. In fact, even using the Rove light, couldn't even use the Rove light that well in the first room that I showed you because at a lot of power it cast too much light. It was reflecting that brown carpet up onto the ceiling and everything was way too much overpowered. So in that case, yes, to bring out the more natural feel to it, I did kind of that semi-exposure. So anyways, I hope this was very helpful to you. I hope it answers some of your questions. There's a lot of things still to show, things that I do. There's a lot of other videos you can watch, but if you did like this video, you can subscribe to this YouTube channel. It doesn't cost you anything, and as soon as one of these videos is posted, you'll be the first to know. Thanks a lot for watching. Until next time, take care, be safe, and get out there and shoot something.